What's a weird rule at your job where you know it's only there because someone was dumb enough to do it in the first place? Back when I was still in school, I had a job at a bookstore that had a special rule. No one was allowed to wear blue jeans. I never really thought much about it, just figuring it was because jeans seemed too casual for work. But then a coworker told me the real story behind the rule. It turned out that a long time ago, there was someone who worked at the bookstore who wore the same pair of blue jeans every single day. And here's the crazy part, they never washed them. The boss kept asking this person to clean their jeans because they were getting dirty and smelly, but they just wouldn't do it. Since the boss couldn't make them wash their jeans, the decision was made to ban blue jeans altogether. That way, they could avoid having anyone else show up to work in stinky, unwashed pants. Fast forward to today, and I'm working in a different kind of place, managing money for pensions and endowments. Every month, we get a big PDF file from our partners that has all the account statements for our clients. When a client wants to see their statement, we used to be able to just take the right page out of the PDF and send it to them. But then something went wrong. A person on our team didn't know how to take out just one page from the PDF and accidentally sent the whole thing to just one client. That was a big mistake, and because of it, we're no longer allowed to send statements using the PDF. Now we have to ask the company that sends us the PDF for the specific statement we need, and then we can give it to the client. It's a bit of a hassle, and it feels like something that could be fixed with some training or by changing the rules a bit, but for now, that's just the way it is. So, the moral of the story here is always wash your jeans, I guess, because unless you want to be the reason for a company wide dress code, that's the way to go. And this guy single handedly turned Casual Friday into Sterilize Everything Sunday. Story 2. In a busy hospital filled with amazing machines and doctors who can do incredible things, there's a funny rule that doesn't make sense at first. No toasters allowed. So, how did this rule start? Well, one day a nurse was really busy taking care of patients and she forgot to take the bread out of the toaster. The bread burned and it caused a fire in the kitchen. The fire was put out quickly, but after that, the hospital decided to get rid of all the toasters. So now, even though the hospital has all these fancy machines, the people who work there can't have toast. But that's not the only strange rule. There's also a rule about keeping desks really clean. This rule says that no paper or anything you can write on is allowed to leave the hospital. That means no books, notepads, sticky notes, tissues, gum wrappers, or even coffee cups. The list of things you can't take is really long. So why is there this rule? No one is really sure, but some people think it's because someone wrote a mean note and then gave it to someone else. Instead of just taking away pens and pencils, the people in charge made a big rule about it. Now everyone has to be careful with what they have on their desks because even small things can get them in trouble. Story 3. I worked at a college help desk and we had a rule about not lending out equipment unless the manager said it was okay. We would get asked for things like headphones all the time. There was a form we used to use, but it was too tricky for some folks, so we weren't allowed to lend anything out without checking with the boss. This made things a bit tricky because before, we would know where everything was since people would sign for the stuff they borrowed. But with the new rule, we didn't have any way to keep track. I wasn't going to bother the manager super early on a weekend just to let someone borrow headphones. In another story, my son's speech and debate team has this really serious rule about not bringing any milk or milk products on the bus. They tell everyone about how important this rule is, and it all started because of one little accident a long time ago. Someone spilled milk on the bus heater during a long trip, and it made the whole ride pretty awful. So now, to make sure that never happens again, there's a no milk rule on the bus forever. So the speech and debate team must also have some serious lactose sensitivity if they're banning milk like it's a toxic liquid. I'm half expecting them to start wearing hazmat suits whenever they pass a dairy aisle, but hey, I would imagine the smell of burning milk on a bus ride isn't the best smell to have on a long bus ride, so makes sense. Story 4. When I was in the Air Force going through tech school, there was a laundry room in the dorms where we'd go to wash our clothes. On one of the dryers, there was this sign that was hard to miss. It said, "Please don't put things in the machines that aren't supposed to be there." That means no rocks, no books, whether they're wet or dry, and nothing else that's just plain weird. Just a heads up, these rules are here because someone in the past decided to try something silly. I was pretty new, so I was wondering if anyone had really done something that crazy. So I asked a friend who had been around for a while if the sign was just for show or if someone had actually done something like that. His face got all serious and he leaned in and said, in a voice that was both angry and quiet, "Yeah, some Marines thought it was a good idea to mess around." It was one of those moments where you realize that the rules that seem a bit over the top are usually there for a reason. Someone, somewhere, decided to test the limits and now we all have to live with the consequences. Story 5. Back in the day, I worked at the Taco Bell Restaurant Support Center, and there was this big rule: no food from other fast food places was allowed inside. If you brought in a burger from McDonald's or tacos from Del Taco, you'd get in trouble. But it was kind of funny because after lunch, you'd see the trash cans in the parking lot filled with bags from all those other places, like a secret food festival gone wrong. When we trained new people for the warehouse, there was this weird thing we had to do. The trainer would take them on a tour of every single bathroom in the whole building. This wasn't just for fun, it was because someone once had an emergency and couldn't find a bathroom, so they used a box of clothes we were going to donate. Yeah, it was a mess. So from then on, everyone had to know where every bathroom was, just in case. And then there's the story of how I accidentally caused a plant ban. I bought this cute little plant from Home Depot and kept it in my office. It started growing and I thought, great, I'll just give it a bigger pot and some fresh soil. So I did that on a Friday before we all went home for the weekend. But when we came back on Monday, my office was like a scene from a bug movie. Tiny fruit flies or something like them were everywhere, covering the walls and flying around. We had to get out the vacuum and clean them all up. After that, no more plants were allowed in the office. Story 6. On my very first day at the library, my boss was showing me around, giving me a grand tour of all the important spots. We walked up to this big outdoor box called the book drop, where people can return their books without going inside. There was a sign on it that said do not leave certain things like DVDs, special reserve books, or stuff for the other library down the road. Feeling a bit smart and trying to make a good impression, I pointed at the sign and said, "Hey, it doesn't say no laptops on there." I knew the library lent out laptops because I used to work in a store that did the same thing. I thought it was a funny thing to say, just making conversation. My boss chuckled and said, "Oh, I doubt anyone would ever do that." But guess what? She must have told someone else about our little chat because a couple of weeks later, one of my coworkers came up to me with a big grin and said, "You won't believe it, but we had to change the sign." And sure enough, someone had actually dropped off a laptop in the book drop. It was like something out of a comedy show, but it really happened. It just goes to show that you never know what people are going to do, even with a sign right in front of them. Now, let me tell you about another time when my friends and I caused a bit of a stir, but this time it was at my friend's job. He worked nights at a gas station, and most of the time it was pretty quiet. He'd read books or play games on his PSP to pass the time. One night, a bunch of us decided to visit him and bring some fun with us. We brought a board game called Settlers of Catan, and we set it up right there in the gas station. We played for hours, but my friend was always super responsible. Whenever a customer came in, he'd stop the game and make sure they were helped. Well, it seemed like our little game night was more noticeable than we thought. A week or so later, all the employees at the gas station got a new rule: no playing board games at work. It was all in good fun, but I guess the bosses thought it might be too distracting or something. Story 7. Back in the day when I was working at a factory, there was this big rule about music that everyone had to follow. They said no music was allowed, and that meant not even listening with headphones at your desk. The bosses had their reasons for this rule, and they explained it to us. They told us that if they let people bring in radios or CD players to the factory floor, it would cause a lot of problems. Everyone would want to listen to different songs or stations, and it would lead to arguments and disagreements. They wanted to keep the work environment peaceful and focused on getting the job done, so they decided it was best to just not allow any music playing out loud. But it wasn't just about the radios and CD players. They were also worried about headphones. They thought if people wore headphones, they may get too caught up in their music and not pay attention to what was going on around them. In a factory, there are all sorts of warning alarms and signals that you need to hear. If someone was wearing headphones and playing their tunes, they might miss an important alarm, which could be dangerous. Now, you might think that people working in the office areas could still listen to music since they weren't on the factory floor. But the union, which was the UAW, didn't like this idea at all. They felt it was unfair that office workers could have music to listen to while the factory workers couldn't. They raised a big fuss about it, saying it wasn't right to have different rules for different workers. In the end, to make everyone happy and to avoid any more arguments, the higher-ups made a decision that applied to everyone, no matter where you worked on the site. They made a rule that said, no music allowed, period. This way, there wouldn't be any confusion or jealousy between the different groups of workers. So that's how we ended up with the site wide no music rule. It wasn't the most popular rule, but it was the one we all had to follow to keep the peace and stay safe on the job. So hey, if you're enjoying the video, please don't forget to hit the subscribe button and like button for more videos just like this, especially if you've got headphones on listening to this in the office. Story 8. At my job, which is at a fast food place, there's this one girl who works with us. She's known for getting really upset over the tiniest things. If something doesn't go her way, even if it's just a small issue, she'll start yelling at the top of her lungs, "I can't take this anymore. I'm quitting right now. I'll give you my 2 weeks notice. It doesn't matter to me." It's pretty dramatic, and you'd think after working there for 5 years, she'd be used to the ups and downs. Her outbursts became so frequent that our manager had to step in and create a new rule for quitting. If anyone wants to quit their job, they can't just shout it out. They have to write it down and give the note to the manager. This way, the manager can make sure that the person isn't just being impulsive or emotional, like that girl tends to be. Just last week, we had a situation where another coworker of mine decided she really wanted to quit. She came up to the manager and told her she was giving her 2 weeks notice. The manager, remembering the new rule, told her about it. My coworker didn't make a big deal out of it. She just said, "Okay," in a really calm voice. Then she took a napkin, wrote "I quit" on it in big letters, and handed it to the manager. It was her way of following the rule, but doing it in the simplest way possible. It wasn't a long letter or anything formal, it was just 2 words on a napkin. The whole thing struck me as pretty funny. It's not every day that you see someone quit their job by writing on a piece of napkin. Story 9. Back in the day when I was serving as a Marine, one of the tasks we had was working on the weapon range. This job was what we called pulling pits, which basically meant we were in charge of changing the targets. So every single morning, without fail, we'd hear this loud voice shouting, "Good morning, Marines!" It was like a wake-up call that got us ready for the day. After that greeting, we'd go through the safety rules and get a refresher on how the whole target pulling operation worked. Now, if you've never seen a weapon range before, let me paint you a word picture. The target pits are set up just past the line marked at 500 yards, and right before these pits, there's something called the berm. The berm is actually a little hill that's there to stop any projectiles that might be flying a bit too low. It's like a safety barrier so that these low-flying rounds don't end up in the pits where we're working. And then beyond the targets, there's another hill, but this one is much bigger. It's there to make sure that no projectiles go flying off the range and cause any trouble. Our job as pit pullers was pretty important. We'd be stationed right below the berm, and we had to let them know if they hit their targets or missed. Plus, we'd swap out the targets whenever needed. The space we worked in was tight, really tight. If you were taller than 6'5", you weren't allowed to pull pits. Why? Because all you had to do was stand on your tiptoes and you'd be poking your head into the unsafe zone. After we got the morning greeting out of the way, we'd go over the rules. Most of them were straightforward and made a lot of sense. Like, if the thing we used to spot shots went outside a marked red zone, we were told not to chase after it. We had to wait until they stopped and we got the all clear. But then, one day, I heard a rule that took the cake for being the most ridiculous thing ever. They said, "Listen up, if they stop, do not, I repeat, do not climb up to the berm to take a peek and see if they're done." Why are we telling you this? Because someone actually did it. Alright, so imagine getting yelled at every morning with a "Good morning, Marines." That could shatter glass. I'm not going to do it with that level for this, but you can imagine it. It's like their version of an alarm clock. I'm just picturing a drill instructor with a megaphone screaming at the sun to rise. Story 10. I work at a little exercise studio that starts its day really early in the morning. We have a cozy chase lounge tucked away in our employee space, which is pretty small, and we joke about calling it our closet. This lounge was something we offered to our front desk team as a little perk. During the lull between 6:30 and 8:30 a.m. classes, they could take a quick rest on it, but only if there weren't any clients in the studio. It was a way to help them catch their breath before the next wave of classes. But things didn't go as planned. One morning after I finished teaching a class, I stepped out to find the front desk completely empty. There wasn't anyone around to greet any early birds or answer the phone. I went to check the back room, and there I found the employee who was supposed to be manning the desk fast asleep on the lounge. He was in such a deep sleep that I had to actually shake him to wake him up. You might think this was just a one-time thing though, but nope, it happened again the next week. Same scenario, different day. I came out of the studio and the desk was abandoned with the employee snoozing away in the back. After this happened twice, we realized we had to do something about it. It wasn't fair to the clients who might need assistance or to the other employees who were working hard. So we had a little meeting and decided to make a new rule: no more sleeping on the job. It was a tough decision because we understand how tiring the early mornings can be, but we had to think about the professionalism and service we offer to our clients. Story 11. In our office, we have a rule that might sound a bit unusual at first. It's don't eat the food in the executive meeting room kitchen unless you've been invited to do so. This rule came about because we had some issues with people helping themselves to food that wasn't meant for them. Let me tell you a bit about how this all came to be. Our office is home to some very well paid lawyers and other high level professionals. These are grown ups, mind you, but that didn't stop them from sneaking into the private kitchen of the executive meeting room during meetings. They would take food that was meant for the executives or other meeting attendees, often before these people even had a chance to grab a bite. It was like a game of beat the executive to the buffet, and it wasn't fair to those who the food was intended for. But that wasn't the only problem. We also had folks trying to get their hands on leftovers before they were actually leftovers. They would swoop in and take food while the meeting attendees were still in the process of serving themselves. It was a bit like vultures circling a meal that wasn't even finished yet. One particular incident really drove the point home and led to a change in how we handled food in the executive kitchen. It was Taco Day, a day when we had tacos for lunch, which are always popular in the office. But this taco day didn't go as planned. A grown man who should have known better managed to spill taco meat all over the floor. And what did he do after creating this mess? He just walked away, leaving the kitchen looking like a taco had just erupted. This spill led to a temporary ban on our leftovers privileges. For months, we weren't allowed to take any leftovers from the executive kitchen because of that one incident. It was a tough lesson, but it taught us the importance of respecting other people's food and the spaces where it's kept. So that's why we have the rule about not eating the food in the executive meeting room kitchen unless you're invited. Story 12. One day I decided to visit a McDonald's near where I live because I saw that they offered free Wi-Fi. I thought it would be a nice place to grab a bite and maybe do a little work on my laptop. As soon as I walked in, I noticed the usual McDonald's vibe: kids playing, people chatting, and the smell of fries in the air. Before I ordered my food, I wanted to wash my hands, so I made my way to the restrooms. That's when I saw something that caught my attention. On both the men's and women's restroom doors, there was a paper sign that read, "No laptops or tablets allowed in the bathroom at any time." I thought it was a bit strange, like who would bring a laptop into a bathroom and why the need for such a sign? After I washed my hands, my curiosity got the better of me. I walked up to the cashier, who was busy taking orders and handing out food. When she noticed me, I asked her about the signs on the restroom doors. She looked around to make sure no one was listening and then leaned over the counter. In a hushed voice, she told me that there had been a problem with people coming into the restaurant, heading straight for the restrooms, and then spending an unusual amount of time in the stalls. Apparently, they were using their laptops to watch videos. She said it had happened multiple times with different guys, and that's why they had to put up the signs. Feeling a bit shocked, I asked her why there was a sign on the women's restroom too. If it was just guys causing trouble, why the need for the second sign? She gave me a look that said, "You'd be surprised," and with a smirk, she told me that it wasn't just men who were doing it. Alright, if you liked any of these stories, here's more for you. YouTube thinks you're going to love this. I'll catch you in that video, and big thanks for hanging out with me on this one.